A white judge finds black woman only to learn she's a legal innovator. Part. Robert Manning sat tall in his judge's chair on a cloudy Tuesday morning. His silver hair and stern face made people nervous in his courtroom. 20 years as a judge had taught him that rules existed for good reasons. Today, like most days, his courtroom was busy with case after case. Linda Wilson stood before him again. This was her third time in his courtroom this month. She wore a simple blue suit that had seen better days, but she stood straight and confident, despite the tired lines around her eyes. Ms. Wilson, you have once again failed to follow proper court procedures, Judge Manning said with a frown. I cannot allow this to continue. Linda took a deep breath. Your Honor, my client couldn't complete these forms without help. The language is too complex for someone with only basic reading skills. Judge Manning sighed. He had heard her excuses before. The law is the law, Ms. Wilson. The forms exist for a reason. I must fine you $500 for contempt of court. The courtroom fell silent. Linda's face showed no emotion, but her hand tightened slightly on her worn leather bag. That $500 was meant for her mother's heart medicine this month. I understand, Your Honor, she said quietly. As the people filed out of the courtroom, Judge Manning watched Linda speak softly to her client, an older man named Thomas, who looked close to tears. Linda placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and smiled, though her eyes remained sad. That evening, Judge Manning drove his expensive car back to his large, empty house. His wife had passed away 3 years ago, and his children lived far away. He ate dinner alone, thinking about the day's cases. Linda Wilson bothered him. She was clearly smart. He had checked her background after her first appearance. Top of her class at law school, offers from big firms in London. Yet here she was, working with poor clients in a small town, constantly breaking his rules. Meanwhile, Linda sat at her tiny kitchen table counting coins. The fine would hurt badly this month. Her tiny flat above the chip shop smelled of grease, but the rent was cheap. Her phone rang, her mother calling to check on the court case. It didn't go. Well, Mom, Linda admitted, but don't worry about your medicine. I'll figure something out. After hanging up, Linda opened her laptop. Another email from her old university friend James at the big London law firm. The job offer still stands, he wrote. Triple your current income. Nice office, no more fighting impossible battles. Linda looked around her small flat, at the stack of case files from people who couldn't afford proper lawyers. Thomas would lose his home if she couldn't help him. The young mother Penny might lose custody of her children without proper representation. The elderly couple down the street faced foreclosure because they couldn't understand the bank's complicated documents. Her phone rang again. An unknown number. Is this Linda Wilson? A shaky voice asked. My name is Betty. Thomas gave me your number. I'm being evicted tomorrow. They say I didn't file something right. I don't know what to do. Linda closed the email from James without replying. She reached for her notepad. I can help you, Betty, she said. Tell me everything from the beginning. Outside, rain began to fall as Linda listened to another person who had fallen through the cracks of a system that wasn't built for them. Tomorrow would be another long day. Another battle. Another chance to stand before Judge Manning and risk. Another fine she couldn't afford. But tonight she would prepare Betty's case. Because someone had to fight for people like Betty, even if that someone was tired, broke, and running out of hope. White judge fines black woman, only to learn she's a legal innovator. Mars Part 2. Judge Robert Manning spent his weekend in his large garden. He cut the grass and trimmed the bushes. The work kept his hands busy, but his mind kept coming back to Linda Wilson. Why did she keep breaking the rules? She was clearly smart enough to know better. On Monday morning, Robert walked into his favorite coffee shop. He ordered his usual black coffee. As he waited, he noticed Linda at a corner table. Papers were spread around her. She looked tired as she talked to an old woman who was crying softly. Robert moved closer. He could hear their conversation. "Don't worry, Mrs. Parker," Linda said gently. They can't just throw you out. You have rights, even if your son signed those papers. But I can't read well, the old woman whispered. Tom said it was just routine papers for the doctor. I didn't know I was signing away my house. We'll fight this, Linda promised. I'll help you. Robert watched as Linda pulled out simple forms with big print. She had made her own versions of the official court documents. This was against the rules, but Robert could see why she had done it. Mrs. Parker's hand shook as she tried to hold a pen. Later that day, Mrs. Parker appeared in Robert's courtroom with Linda beside her. Robert recognized the unofficial forms immediately. He frowned. Ms. Wilson, these are not the proper forms, he said. Your Honor, my client is 82 years old with poor eyesight and limited reading ability, Linda explained. The official forms are impossible for her to understand or complete. Robert looked at Mrs. Parker. She reminded him of his own mother, who had passed away 10 years ago. His mother had been proud and independent until the end. What would she have done in Mrs. Parker's situation? The court requires proper forms, Robert said firmly, but something felt wrong as he said it. That evening, Robert ate dinner alone again. The big house felt empty. He thought about his life as a judge. He had always believed in following rules. Rules kept society working. But today, looking at Mrs. Parker's confused face, he had wondered if some rules might need changing. His phone rang. It was his daughter Mary calling from London. "How are you, Dad?" she asked. "I'm fine," he answered automatically. "Just thinking about work." "You work too hard," Mary said. "You need to get out more, meet people." Robert thought about Linda Wilson and her clients. They were people he would never normally meet. The next morning, Robert decided to take a different route to work. He drove through the part of town where most of Linda's clients lived. The houses were small and needed repair. Children played in the streets instead of in gardens. An old man sat on a broken chair outside his door, watching the world go by. Robert slowed his car when he saw a small building with a hand-painted sign, Community Legal Help Center. Through the window, he could see Linda talking to a group of people. She was pointing at a large chart on the wall that seemed to explain legal procedures in simple pictures. Robert parked his car and walked closer. Through the open door, he could hear Linda's voice. "The system wasn't built for us," she was saying, "but that doesn't mean we can't learn to use it. Together we can make it work for our community." The people nodded. They trusted her. Robert felt like an outsider looking in on something important that he had never noticed before. A young man spotted Robert standing in the doorway. "Can we help you?" he asked loudly. Everyone turned to look. Linda's eyes widened when she saw the judge. "Your Honor?" she said, surprised. "Is everything okay?" Robert felt uncomfortable with all eyes on him. "I was just passing by," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Linda looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. "Would you like to join us, Judge Manning? We're discussing tenant rights today." Robert hesitated. This was not his world. These were not his people. But something made him step forward into the room. "Yes," he said, "I would like to learn more." White judge finds black woman only to learn. She's a legal innovator. Part 3. The community center was nothing like Judge Robert Manning's courtroom. The walls were painted bright yellow. Children's drawings hung next to simple legal charts. Plastic chairs formed a circle instead of neat rows facing a high bench. Robert felt strangely out of place in his expensive suit. Linda Wilson stood at the front of the room with a large whiteboard. She was explaining eviction notices in words everyone could understand. Robert watched as people nodded and asked questions. No one seemed afraid to speak up here. "The law says they must give you at least 28 days' notice," Linda explained. "If they try to make you leave sooner, that's against the law." An old man raised his hand. "But what if they change the locks while I'm out shopping?" "That happened to my friend Bill last month." Linda nodded. "That's called an illegal eviction, Mr. Thomas. It's against the law and you can take them to court for that." Robert listened with growing interest. He had handled hundreds of eviction cases, but he had never thought about what happened to people after they left his courtroom. Where did they go? How did they find new homes with an eviction on their record? After the meeting ended, most people came up to thank Linda. Some hugged her, others asked more questions. Robert stood awkwardly to the side until the room was almost empty. "Thank you for staying, Your Honor," Linda said, looking tired but still friendly. "This must be very different from your courtroom." "It is," Robert admitted, "but I'm glad I came. I had no idea you were doing all this." Linda smiled. "Would you like some tea? We can talk more." They moved to a small kitchen at the back of the center. Linda made tea in chipped mugs while Robert looked at the notices on the wall. There were food bank schedules, free health clinic times, and job training programs. "How long have you been running this center?" Robert asked. 3 years now," Linda said, handing him a mug. "I started it after I saw how many people couldn't afford proper legal help." "But the legal aid system," Robert began. "Doesn't help everyone," Linda finished. "The forms are complicated. The offices are only open during working hours. Many people can't take time off work or they'll lose their jobs." Robert thought about this. He had always assumed that people who didn't follow court procedures were being difficult or lazy. He had never considered that they might be facing real barriers. "Show me what you do here," he said suddenly. Linda looked surprised but nodded. She showed him the simplified forms she had created. They had the same legal information as the official forms, but used simpler words and larger print. She showed him videos she had made explaining common legal problems. She introduced him to volunteers who helped people fill out paperwork or went with them to appointments. "Most of our clients can't read well," Linda explained. "Some don't speak English as their first language. Others are elderly or disabled. The legal system doesn't make space for them." Robert thought about Mrs. Parker from the coffee shop, and Mr. Thomas with his eviction question, and all the others he had fined or ruled against because they couldn't navigate the system he found so easy. "What about Thomas Brown?" Robert asked, remembering the man who had been with Linda in court the day he fined her. "The older man who couldn't fill out the forms?" Linda's face grew sad. "He lost his home. The forms were due the next day, and we couldn't prepare new ones in time after your ruling." Robert felt a strange pain in his chest. His decisions had real consequences for real people. "Where is he now?" he asked quietly. "Staying with his daughter. It's very crowded and they live far from his doctors. But at least he's not on the street." As the evening grew late, Robert helped Linda clean up the center. They walked out together into the cool night air. "Thank you for showing me all this," Robert said. "I think I understand better now why you bend the rules." Linda locked the door and turned to face him. "The rules weren't made for people like our clients, Your Honor. Sometimes bending them is the only way to get justice." As Robert drove home, his big, empty house no longer seemed like a comfort. Instead, it felt like a symbol of how separate his life had been from the struggles of ordinary people. White judge fines black woman, only to learn she's a legal innovator. Part 4. The next morning, Judge Robert Manning sat in his office before court began. He looked at the day's cases with new eyes. Each name on the list was a real person with a story, not just a case number. He thought about Linda Wilson and her community center all night. His clerk knocked on the door. "Ready to begin, Your Honor?" Robert nodded and put on his black robes. As he walked into the courtroom, he noticed things he had never paid attention to before. The complicated signs with legal language, the nervous faces of people who didn't know what to expect, the way some people struggled to read the papers given to them. The first case was about a young man named William who had missed his rent payments. The landlord wanted to evict him. "Do you have a lawyer?" Robert asked William. "No, sir," William said. His hands shook as he held his papers. "I can't afford one." In the past, Robert would have simply followed the rules. The landlord had the right paperwork. William had missed payments. The law was clear. But today, Robert looked at William differently. "Can you tell me why you missed the payments?" Robert asked. William looked surprised. No one had asked him to explain before. I had an accident at work, sir. Broke my arm, couldn't work for 6 weeks. I tried to explain to the landlord, but he said rules are rules. Robert thought about what Linda would do. Have you applied for emergency housing support? William looked confused. I don't know what that is. Robert made a decision. This court. We'll take a short break, he announced. When we return, I want to see if we can find a better solution than eviction. During the break, Robert called Linda. Can you come to court today? I need your help with something. Linda arrived 30 minutes later, surprised by the call. Robert explained William's situation. There's a special fund for workers injured on the job, Linda said. If he qualifies, it could cover his missed rent. And I know his landlord. He's done this before. Some of his practices aren't legal. When court resumed, Robert did something unusual. He invited Linda to explain the options to William right there in the courtroom. The landlord looked annoyed, but Robert didn't care. Your Honor, this is highly irregular, the landlord's expensive lawyer complained. So is failing to inform tenants of their rights, Robert replied firmly. By the end of the day, William had a plan to pay his missed rent and keep his home. The landlord was ordered to fix several safety violations in the building, and Robert had made a decision that would change everything. That evening, Robert drove to Linda's community center again. She was teaching another class, this time about workers' rights. Robert waited until she finished. I've been thinking about what you showed me, he said when they were alone. About how the legal system fails people who need it most. Linda nodded. It happens every day. I want to help, Robert said. I have an idea, but I'll need your help. They sat at the small table in the back room and talked for hours. Robert explained his plan to start a new program at the courthouse. Simple forms, volunteers to help people understand their rights. Special court sessions for those who couldn't take time off work. Do you think it could work? Robert asked. Linda looked at him with surprise. It would change everything, but the other judges, the lawyers, they won't like it. Robert smiled. Let me worry about them. You've been fighting this battle alone for too long. As they worked on the details, Thomas Brown, the man who had lost his home, came into the center. He stopped when he saw the judge. Your Honor, he said stiffly, I didn't expect to see you here. Robert stood up. Mr. Brown, I owe you an apology. My ruling in your case was legally correct but morally wrong. I'm working with Ms. Wilson to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to others. Thomas looked between Linda and Robert with surprise. You two are working together now? Linda smiled. Sometimes the most unlikely partnerships make the biggest changes. For the first time in years, Robert felt truly excited about his work. His comfortable life had been missing something important, purpose. Now, looking at Linda's determined face and Thomas's cautious hope, he knew he had found it. White judge finds black woman, only to learn she's a legal innovator. Part 5-3. Months later, the courthouse looked different. A new sign hung in the entrance, Community Justice Program. Inside, volunteers in bright blue vests helped people fill out forms. Pictures on the walls explained legal processes in simple steps. A play area for children sat in one corner so parents could attend their hearings. Judge Robert Manning watched from his office window as Linda Wilson guided an elderly couple through their paperwork. Her patient smile reminded him of how much had changed. How much he had changed. His phone rang. It was the head judge, Edward Peterson. Robert, the numbers from your courtroom are impressive, Edward said. Case completion's up 40%. Appeals down by half. How are you doing it? Come see for yourself, Robert replied. It's easier to show you than explain. Later that day, Robert led Edward through the new program areas. Linda joined them, explaining how the simplified forms worked. They watched as volunteers helped people practice what to say in court. This is highly unusual, Edward muttered. Breaking traditions. The old traditions weren't working for everyone, Robert said. People were losing homes, children, and jobs because they couldn't navigate our system. They stopped to watch a special evening court session. People who couldn't miss work during the day finally had access to justice. Your Honor, a woman called, approaching Robert. It was Mrs. Parker, the elderly woman from the coffee shop months ago. "I wanted to thank you. The new forms helped me win my case. I get to keep my house." Edward raised his eyebrows. "You know your clients personally now?" "I know their stories," Robert corrected. "It makes me a better judge." After the tour, they gathered in Robert's office. Linda spread out papers showing the program's results. "We've helped over 200 people in 3 months," she explained. "People who would have been lost in the old system." Edward looked thoughtful. "The cost?" "Less than you might think," Robert answered. "Many volunteers are law students getting practical experience. The simplified forms actually save time and money." Edward tapped his fingers on the desk. "Other judges are talking, Robert. Not all of it positive." "Change is hard," Linda said, "but necessary." Edward studied her for a long moment. "You're the woman he fined that day, aren't you? The one who kept breaking the rules." Linda smiled. "Sometimes you have to break rules to fix them." Edward stood up. "I'll bring this to the Judicial Committee next week. No promises, but I'm impressed." After he left, Robert and Linda walked through the now quiet courthouse. Their footsteps echoed in the empty halls. "Did you ever think we'd get this far?" Linda asked. Robert shook his head. "I spent 20 years enforcing rules without questioning who they served. You made me see differently." They reached the main entrance. Through the glass doors, they could see Thomas Brown talking to a group of people on the courthouse steps. He had become one of their best volunteers, using his own experience to help others. "The committee might still say no," Linda warned. "Then, we'll find another way," Robert said firmly. The next week, Robert stood nervously before the Judicial Committee. 7 serious faces looked back at him as he explained the program. "This breaks with over a century of court tradition," one judge complained. "That's exactly the point," Robert replied. "Times change, people change. Shouldn't justice change too?" He showed them the numbers, the success stories, the faces of real people helped by the program. When the votes were counted, the program was approved for all courtrooms in the district. That evening, the community center was filled with people celebrating. Thomas Brown raised his glass in a toast. "To Judge Manning and Linda Wilson," he called out, 2 people from different worlds who found common ground in justice. Robert looked across the room at Linda, who was laughing with Mrs. Parker. He thought about how a fine had led to friendship and then to real change. Outside, people gathered who had once feared the courthouse. Now they entered with hope instead of dread. Some would win their cases. Others would lose. But all would be heard and understood. Justice, Robert had learned, wasn't just about rules. It was about people. And thanks to one woman brave enough to break the rules, many lives, including his own, had changed forever.